Welcome, everyone. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
And I'm Sylvia Earle. I'm an ocean elder, National Geographic explorer in residence, founder of Mission Blue, friend of Liz.
This is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. And miraculously, I have managed to screen share.
And the one thing that we start with every time is to just remind everybody
The world
is
is blue.
blue. Oh, yes. Isn't
Absolutely.
it beautiful?
Um, let's see. During the program, you can put questions by writing them into the Q&A box, and we will get to as many of them as we can towards the end of the program. And we will try to see if we can accommodate raised hands as well. I'll try to look for those. And today we are going to be talking about horseshoe crabs. We're being joined by John Tanacretti. Uh-oh. Here he is.
He's the one on the left.
That's right. John, you can turn your camera and video on whenever you like. John's professor of Earth and Environmental Studies at Molloy College. There he is.
Hi.
And he's an expert on the health of the Long Island coastal ecosystem. I first met John actually Easter Island. We were there on a trip together. It was a Explorers Club flag expedition, and we were doing studies on climate change and collecting some core samples and so forth there.
But
And
no horseshoe crabs.
But no horseshoe crabs there at all.
No.
But after that trip, he sent me this awesome book, Limulus in the Limelight.
Limulus being the name, the genus of horseshoe crabs.
And,
Limulus, yes.
And you wrote the introduction for this awesome
yes,
book.
A little salute to John and the horseshoe crabs.
But the horseshoe crabs, here's a fake horseshoe crab.
Yes.
They played such a great role in my childhood. I remember finding these guys on the beach and just always being really amazed by their cool shape and wondering what the heck they do. And you grew up with them as well.
Actually, I credit horseshoe crabs for luring me into the ocean. When I was a little kid in New Jersey, they were trying to get out of the ocean to come up on the beach to lay their eggs. The males and females came often as a couple, and I thought they should be in the ocean, so I spent a lot of time trying to put them back in the ocean. And they waited until I got out of sight.
They crawled
and then they went
back out.
Then they crawled back out again.
How about you, John? How did you get involved in horseshoe crabs?
It was a little subdued, but and I mentioned the year because it was a critical year in my life anyway. 1965, I graduated high school, and for that last year, that senior year, I would walk to a place in Brooklyn called Coney Island. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, walked to Coney Island to go fishing off the fishing pier. And there was the New York Aquarium, which was there, part of the New York Zoological Society, which with William Beebe and all of the ocean exploration, it was a mecca. And it had the Osborne Laboratories for Marine Science. And in the laboratory, I volunteered as a docent. And so I cleaned a lot of glassware, endless glassware. But I used to sneak into where all the scientists were. There were 4 Nobel laureates that worked in that laboratory at some point in time. But I would go into the scanning electron microscope room, SEM, because they had a scientific illustrator there. And she was amazing because I was kind of an art, I wasn't very good, but I was interested in sketches and drawings. And so I would sneak in to watch the work that she was doing. And to this day, it just always gets me excited to see the artistic aspect of nature, in addition to a photograph. But there's nothing like a sketch that can really, we have a little bit close to that today in computer graphics, but a good artwork is always tremendously accurate, and it it just transcends into what you do in the field. The field observations are all the time. So anyway, I'm at the New York Aquarium, and they had this ooh and ah exhibit. They would have this water falling over, and all the little ones would go ooh ah. So I would be standing there, and I would be holding horseshoe crabs and just showing them. And that kind of but that was really early on into, I was always interested in science and reading, but it wasn't until I came back to the museum to talk to George Ruggieri, who was the director of the aquarium, not museum, the aquarium, and he wrote a book that I had read that particular summer called The Healing Sea, and it talked about getting pharmaceuticals from marine organisms, and there's a whole host of them. And then fast forward to working with the National Park Service. I was involved as a coastal research ecologist for the National Park Service. So everything from Maine to Gulf Islands. And we had a center at University of Rhode Island Graduate School of Oceanography. And we would work on that and on just about anything on the coastline. But we honed in on the horseshoe crabs from Delaware Bay. And I had met Carl Schuster, and I met him at the aquarium.
I have a big book right here.
And Hal Haskins, and Carl's book is the kind of the of biblical proportions. What you look at when you look at horseshoe crabs. And then I worked, as I was working toward my PhD years later. I did a few years in New Jersey at Rutgers at their engineering program, but I took all my ecology courses with Hal Haskins, and Hal Haskins was the oyster maven of the universe. And Hal used to say to me all the time, Jack, the thing you want to look at is looking at those horseshoe crabs needs a lot of work. So I said, all right, we'll take a look at that. But the Park Service was more habitat protection. And so it was kind of a combination of things, but you have to be mesmerized. All you have to do is go one time to Delaware Bay to see this intensive interaction between migration, between use of habitat. And it's interesting, even in this picture here, where you see in the background, all of the homes on pilings all over. I mean, that today, that's one of the concerns we have along the coastline about the development up to the coastline.
Oh, sure.
Right.
And so,
right.
yeah, I just, and that idea of development or engineering and infrastructure, and how it influences everything from horseshoe crabs to what they support, all really started in looking at national parks along the coastline. Because for all intents and purposes, whatever the designation for the park is, it is still preserved in perpetuity. That was the whole idea, the Organic Act and the creation of the National Park System. And you start out with that preservation mandate, and then where the little details or the debates that go on have to do with the use of those coastlines. But you got to preserve the habitat. You don't preserve the habitat, you really have a very, very difficult time beyond that. I mean, that should be the primary concept of that type of thing. So that's my short history for
Very good.
getting involved with horseshoe crabs.
And these are such ancient animals. I mean, they're not even true crabs. I mean, they're most closely related to spiders and other arachnids.
Scorpions. Yeah.
Yeah, they certainly are. They're arthropods, and so they're related to scorpions and spiders, arachnids. But they have their own family, the Chelicerae, and Chelicerae are animals with their mouth parts surrounded by their legs, and that in itself makes them pretty interesting. And they are paleo survivors, 455 million years, give or take a week or two in there. From the standpoint of these animals crawling around under the legs of brontosauruses and dinosaurs, they outlasted all the dinosaurs. They even outlasted their closest relatives at the time, the Eurypterids, which is the New York State fossil, and of course the trilobites. And the trilobites were incredibly diversified. And when you take a look at Niles Eldridge at the Museum of Natural History would talk about this all the time in looking at the diversity of trilobites in paleohistory from the Cambrian on. They started out with fairly simple design, and then they became all these exotic looking animals, and they're all gone. Horseshoe crabs, for all intents and purposes, even somebody with an initial understanding of them and having studied them, you take a look at there's only 4 species on Earth of horseshoe crabs. But if you looked at the paleolimuli and you look at the earliest fossilized remains, it's very difficult to even tell the difference. Even if you've been studying horseshoe crabs, you can, and actually most of the fossilized remains were either molts that fossilized, or their tracks and trails, which may have been covered over by a volcanic eruption or something that froze in time that particular activity of moving along the coast. And I think that's one of the major things. And there's 4 basic kind of themes associated with horseshoe crabs. One is its paleo survival. To have survived 5 mass extinction events in Earth history, that alone should be enough to preserve them for forever in human history. And so it's always difficult when I kind of say that, oh, well, they're living fossils, and they go, well, I'm a living fossil. But the whole bottom line is when you look at these animals in their habitat needs, they have gone through incredible changes in the environment over time. So
they may not survive us.
That's
John.
true.
Yeah,
they may not survive us.
Yeah,
that is so true, and that is for reasons that they never even had. And I mean, it's one thing to lose habitat. It's one thing to lose them for predation or natural. Paleontologists talk about the length of time that species exist on the planet, the clade, the idea of 1 to 2 million years on average, depending on the species. Dinosaurs predominated for 125 million years on Earth, and tremendous diversity, tremendous sizes. These animals didn't. These animals were predominant in the early coastlines. Their cycle, their entire reproductive cycle hasn't changed really, that we can understand. And the idea that they're invertebrates makes it, because when you look at invertebrates in general, if you're talking about coral reef systems, they tend to be more sensitive to environmental perturbations than the larger animals. And again, I'm making a general statement there. There are examples of all of these things. But for example, the horseshoe crabs have a reproductive cycle that, from the standpoint of what we do at Molloy College, and at the Center for Environmental Research and Coastal Oceans Monitoring, CERCOM, which is our field station, the main thing at the field station is captive breeding of horseshoe crabs. And there's a whole story right there. We may have to go into 2 whole sessions.
We will, but you're saying,
the idea of managing horseshoe crabs along the coastline is the thing, but they're invertebrates, so they molt, and the males molt 16 times in a 9-year cycle, and females molt 17 times in an 11-year cycle before they're sexually mature. They're not sexually mature until 9 or 11 years. So here you have this incredible expanse of time, this tremendous fecundity, the reproduction of these eggs that, like you see in this picture right here.
This picture, yeah. They
each
come ashore
female,
and they just start laying those eggs and putting them down in the sand.
Yeah.
And you can see the little guys developing there. Here's a handful of them.
That's a single clutch. A single female will put between 80 and 120,000 eggs in a season. They'll burrow in and nest along the shoreline, and then there's usually, as you can see here, a lot of other predation going on, because red knots, ruddy turnstones, coastal birds that are migrating at the same time, synchronizing that migration, they literally triple in their body weight, and they're constantly eating the eggs. whether they're at the surface, churned up in tides or tidal cycles. But the idea of each of the females that are in here, there's a single male that will, and you look at their physiology, their first appendages are little hooks. It's called amplexus. There's actually a groove on the exterior of the carapace of the female, so you know that it's reproductively active. And the idea of one male for the one female, it probably would have reduced the ability to have this genetic survival as well, because there's tons of satellite males that are about, and they're all putting sperm into the waters, into the coastline. It's really kind of a cornucopia of getting young juvenile horseshoe crabs going, and they've been doing it for 445 million years. So
So they
It's
preceded
amazing.
the birds by quite a lot.
But these birds are, they've got an amazing story as well, because these little red knots, they're like this little robin-sized bird, and yet they travel like 19,000 miles every year, and they show up at the same time as these horseshoe crabs come ashore, and they're absolutely reliant upon that, as you say,
Nutrition.
that nutrition and that abundance that these horseshoe crabs bring to the ecosystem.
They go from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back again, stopping
To
along-
tank up.
Yeah, tank up.
That
Right.
is the most massive commute you could think of. And when you think of
One of the
migrations, there's
skinny-
tendencies for migrations, like with maybe whales or some other
Yeah.
where there's a large expanse of habitat.
But think about this as an ecosystem that goes from one pole to the other, or at
Right.
least polar region,
And
not
and it-
the actual pole. But
it really drives home the point of needing to protect these sort of, these, not just the flyways, but also the
critical
this-
areas.
critical areas and swimways and these interconnecting habitats that we've talked about in some of our other episodes, where you can't just sort of protect them in one area. You've got to kind of protect
All of it.
all of it.
Correct.
And
Correct.
but these birds,
It's that linkage. It's that linkage that is really important. And I worked for the U.S. Coast Guard for a few years as it was called, as an environmental administrator was the title, but I was preparing environmental impact statements for bridge and highway construction in 7 states. And in those states, the U.S. Coast Guard had the permit regulatory responsibility. And this is years ago, the Coast Guard was considered part of the U.S. Department of Transportation at the federal level. And so I was a civilian and worked in preparing these impact statements. And we would do these coastal surveys, looking at where a bridge or a highway was going to be replaced or a new one was coming in. And invariably, we would, on the East Coast of the United States, have to worry about the habitat that these animals were in. And we would say this all the time: you can't keep chopping up a coastline and putting it in patches. Those patches have to have some kind of connections. It could be maybe fly over it, but you can't necessarily swim through it or go by it if you've got a highway blocking it off, or you don't have tidal actions. So there was a constant battle all the time with, effective and efficient transportation versus, right, an engineer. As a environmental engineer, you say the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but you can't have a straight line all the time when you're talking about the coastline. Yeah, this is another example of these animals from the standpoint of their habitat. They're only found on the east sides of continents, and
Right.
This is it. They're not distributed all over the world.
no, they're
So-
very limited in their distribution, really.
And if you
Right.
look at that, you might think, oh, gosh, must be a lot of them. But they're not.
Right,
They're not.
right.
Especially now in Asia, their numbers are even in more trouble than those along the eastern seaboard of North America. And
Yes,
on the
I
Yucatan.
agree totally, Sylvia, because in Indonesia and Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand,
China.
we know nothing about them. In the Philippines, none of the islands have been surveyed. There's only one island, the southern island in Japan, that has horseshoe crabs, and it's meager in the numbers. But in Singapore, on a monthly basis, 10,000 animals are harvested,
Oh,
bled out. All the blood is taken out and sent for pharmaceutical use. And then they scoop out whatever is inside the carapace, or the exoskeleton, the prosoma, as it's called. And then they sell it for food. They put it in little plastic bags and they send it off to the fish market. And there never used to be a road from where these beaches were. And then the government built the road. So now they can bring a truck right there and put all these animals on there, but they're eliminated. They're not in the breeding stock. They're not even talking about that. And you go on YouTube and they've got all of these menu slates. This has become one of, I jumped ahead to the fourth issue today, but it's the idea of exotic foods. I mean,
yeah.
this is the Asian palate is very, very unique in it. And even something like this picture here showing harvests in the early 1900s. Here, the animal was harvested for fertilizer.
Right.
And as much as we have horrible things to say about fossil fuels, it's the replacement of horseshoe crabs for fertilizer with chemical fertilizers that prevented that from happening. Now, they're not harvested at this level, but their numbers, we don't really know what their numbers are. As a matter of fact, it's constantly talked about. How many horseshoe crabs are there off the shore? And
Right.
I've heard everything from 2 million, 3 million to 12 million to 16 million, which means we don't know. We
We
really
have
don't
no
know.
idea. And
No idea.
how long does the horseshoe crab live? Does anyone actually know that?
Carl Schuster used to say to me that he projected based upon terminal molts, any encrusting organisms, because they're little habitats themselves.
Little islands, they're so cute.
Yeah, they are. I mean, there's tons of stuff growing on them. I mean, you name it, it grows on them. And I'm not sure what that means because it kind of stays still for a little while. So the point is that we really don't know how many there are. And they could live, the most that Carl thought was maybe 25, 30 years, something along that line. And probably that could inch, the error bar is pretty wide on that, but maybe 40 years at most at this point. But even that's pretty good for
Pretty
an
long
invertebrate.
time. Yeah, it's a good
So-
long time. But
Yeah.
to see, an image like this, it's sort of reminiscent of, like we've seen stacks of bison skulls, or we've seen stacks of abalone or conch, other animals that we've just sort of taken for granted, and
Passenger pigeons.
passenger pigeons, and just sort of like extracted them for these really,
And you know what? It changes the chemistry of the planet to take so much out of the ocean. And
Yes.
the systems that constantly recycle nutrients. Taking whales out of the ocean really disrupted the nutrient cycle. The nitrates and phosphates that pass through whales and fertilize the plankton. The same is true with every living thing. But when you see an organism that has a place in the system, and we don't really, in ignorance, we have just broken those chains.
yeah. And today it seems like the major threat, or one of the major threats to the horseshoe crab, is this, taking them for bait, and chopping them up, and particularly the females are kind of targeted. So the really important reproductive egg-bearing animals are gathered up,
Priority.
are prioritized to be chopped up, and they're using them to bait traps to catch these mollusks, or I guess they're a whelk. Some people call them a conch.
Conch and eel, American
Yeah,
eel.
got a slide coming up of the eels, but even looking at cutting up a horseshoe crab to then extract these animals, which it doesn't seem like they're going to be a very fast reproducer either,
No,
right?
No, they live a long time.
Living a long time. So I mean, it's just this complete cycle of unsustainability.
The only way that fishermen get away with is that they have a zero accounting base. These
Right.
You're regarded as free goods. Let's go get them. What's with it? Not free. We shouldn't be thinking of them as free. There's a price to be paid. All of us pay it. Earth pays it. The ocean pays it. We all
Absolutely.
lose.
Yeah.
And these eels are, even these eels that you see here, they'll take like a a chunk of the female horseshoe crab, put it into these traps, and the eels are they can't resist the the aroma of the eggs and the other biochemical markers that are let off from the
Essence of crab.
yeah. And well, it's and it's like distressed crab, right? So it's putting out like these distressed
Come get me.
come get me type things but the eels themselves are endangered at this point.
And that's strange, because when I was a kid, nobody could imagine they could ever be endangered. There were so many. And that's the same thing with horseshoe crabs. When my dad was a kid, nobody thought you could diminish the number of horseshoe crabs. But even by the time I came along, there were fewer. And look at it today. It's just tragic that we think they're somehow there for us to take. What gives us the right to eliminate a whole category of life?
It is the toughest conservation message to bring across to the general public. Is the idea is, well, you still see them, you still
Yeah.
can collect them, and fishermen will say to me, I can find them all the time. I don't have any problem with that. They won't tell you where they're finding them, because
Yeah.
that's kind of the prerogative of the fishermen. And I'm not saying that as a negative statement. I'm just saying it as the reality is that no organism that has gone extinct was ever, with large populations, immune from extinction.
Right.
Carrier pigeon, the perfect example of that. People would
Yep.
shoot up in the sky, didn't have aim, and the birds would be falling out of the sky. The American bison, if it wasn't for Teddy Roosevelt and the Bronx Zoo, we wouldn't have bison out west because of
Right.
artificial insemination and taking them into the Bronx to do that. I tell them
Now, Ted
people all the
Turner,
time.
another Teddy.
Another, yeah.
He's provided a haven for them.
But it just seems so wrong, really. I mean, to see a horseshoe crab, this ancient animal, reduced to something you stuff into a sack and throw into a trap to
Crush them.
crush them up, and then use it to capture these these big whelks, they're conch.
It's perverse.
It's just strange,
so
and
perverse.
it's really feeding. It's not like anybody really needs to eat these whelks. It's again feeding a market
luxury.
that's very
Yeah.
much a choice that people
It's a
have.
luxury diet.
It is a niche kind of fishery, but fishermen will argue you're taking away even a portion of anything that's going about.
They're not free.
These two overly enthusiastic high school students. People say don't hold it up by the tail, and they did it for a very short time, and it didn't harm the animal. This animal wasn't harmed. But I just wanted to go back for a second to the idea of their ecological significance. Certainly from a conservation standpoint, they provide the protein boosts that these birds migrating thousands of miles for, but they have a subtler benthic ecological function in the benthos and mud flats. And as you come into estuaries, these animals are churning over sediments. They're moving in the whole, I hate to use, it's kind of a hackneyed term, but the biogeochemical aspects of estuaries. Without them, they wouldn't have all of this bioturbation, which is very, very important.
Yeah.
And it's a micro level. No one sees this. You can't tell anybody about it. You can say, oh, they turn over the muds.
They're like
But
bulldozers.
it's really a big part of their ecological play, what their function is. And then the whole idea of wetlands, and the idea that, and this is truly kind of grandiose in attitude, I think, in the idea that we can restore wetlands. And even when I was with the Park Service, the whole idea of wetland restoration, no wetland, no marsh, no recreated marsh, no matter how extensive or expansive it is, has never, in the literature or anything that I've ever read, been brought back to the level of biomass and productivity that a virgin marsh is. Don't mess with it, leave it alone, don't develop it. And I just, in 2019, the end of December, I just published The Redesigned Earth, my new book on coastal engineering, the idea that engineers have this tremendous power to create and to restructure and to redesign. And one of the big things has to do with infrastructure and the whole idea of infrastructure eliminating habitat, and that you can recreate marshes. Remember, there was
Or beaches.
the whole proposal, a political approach at one point about that, net zero loss of marshes. If I take away 2 by filling it in and making a condo unit, I can build you 4 more over here, so you'll have twice as many marsh
Crazy.
acres. And it just never. John
It's
Teal,
never
John
worked.
Milgrid,
Yeah.
the Life and Death of the Salt Marsh identified it, that we had to put a dollar value on every acre of marsh in order to try to protect it. But that same acre costs, exceedingly a lot more today in storm protection and mud flats. I mean, people don't want to go necessarily. I'd like a mud flat every
I
once in
love
a
mud
while.
flats.
But that's one of the major functions, especially for Limulus, because the other 3 species are much more areas, smaller numbers, and spread out over much larger areas in Asia and certainly in Japan, and they've all been impacted by harvesting and loss of habitat. Amazing impacts in Asia. And if you're along the shore, again, they're a big part of the diversity of all of the animals just in this tiny little one dredge, blue claws, spider crabs, horseshoe crabs, fish, winter flounder, all of the types of things it's that diversity. And that to me has been always a major issue and a scary issue as the prime issue. I've always thought, look at biological diversity. And if we can corner the protection of animals and their habitat, a lot of other things will disappear as issues in my mind. And so I talked about that in Redesigned Earth. We talked about how we deal with water resources or how we deal with coastal infrastructure. Sandy, as it wasn't a hurricane, right? I spent 3 years in the Navy as a hurricane hunter out of the Air Jacks. And in 1969, I flew the tail end of Camille. Camille was a level 5 hurricane, the strongest, most intense hurricane to make landfall at full-blown 22-foot storm surge, 195 miles an hour. It was intense. And I was a tail end of that in my flight crew. But I can tell you, I had a greater appreciation of what coastal habitat can do. It will absorb these things, but you can't put a brick house and you can't put a corrugated sheet piling to handle all of that. And Sandy did that. And here's Sandy in New York alone, for Long Island, from Brooklyn to Montauk, $60 billion in restoration. And the majority of that restoration went into rebuilding boardwalks, recreational facilities, and some more infrastructure. So again, it's the priority of the habitat be protected.
And and as you're saying, we're removing the animals from the environment in such numbers, wholesale like this. Like, here's a boatload of crabs that the wardens have got, some guy poaching.
There are a few places where horseshoe crabs are safe, but they should all be safe everywhere all the time. They're such an iconic species. John, you mentioned that they are in a class or a category by themselves. Actually, the level of specialness is equivalent to that of all of the insects. They're in a class.
Yeah.
Insects are in a class. Limulus, the 4 species of horseshoe crabs, are in a class, along with this level of recognition as something special. All insects. There might be 500,000 of them, and only 4 horseshoe crabs.
Right.
So if you lose 1 horseshoe crab species, you're losing a quarter of the genetic information that is unique to that class of organisms.
That is a significant and major comment. That is absolutely important there. And you saw my colleague with the National Park Service.
Yeah.
And Don is still with the American Littoral Society,
is.
still doing a lot of work in Jamaica
Yeah.
Bay. Jamaica Bay was a major place for it. Gateway National Recreation Area, when I was chief of natural resources, was the first national park to declare horseshoe crabs off bounds, no collection
Excellent.
within Jamaica Bay. Now, the way we did it, we said it's part of our natural resources, and national parks protect natural resources. But it was a battle. It was a battle with the state. It was a battle with fishermen. It was a battle. I mean, literally for decades.
Nothing.
But then Fire Island did it, and then Assateague, Chincoteague, and then up and down the coast, all the national parks have basically said, you don't take it out for commercial purposes, which it was for, and you have to leave horseshoe crabs alone. So that was a very positive, very positive thing. And it's happening internationally, and the way it's happening internationally is interesting because you tend to focus in on, because there's enough of issues and deal with it locally, and then to broaden it out on a global scale didn't happen for me personally until we had our first horseshoe crab conference, which was at the time at Dowling College, and Sylvia, you graciously was there, inspired everyone to really talk about this work and look at all of the activities. And when we published the work out of there, the primary conservation, as far as in encapsulating all conservation aspects of all species, is the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature.
Right.
And IUCN has scientific specialty groups. So it's over 12 years now, 13 years, that we have a scientific specialty group for horseshoe crabs. And I'm on the initial group, Mark Botten at Fordham, Paul Shin at Hong Kong University, where we were the Glenn Gawvry in Delaware, and ERDG. And so, and Dave Smith from USGS. These were the people coming together. Jennifer Mattei in Connecticut is on the SSG, the steering committee. And what's so important about this is that it's the only aspect on an international basis that identifies horseshoe crabs exactly for the purpose that you mentioned, and puts them on the red list. Now,
Excellent.
it makes it feel good that we got it on the red list, but it makes you feel bad that it had to go on the red list.
Right.
Yeah.
This is
On the
a
red list is the
double-edged sword.
endangered species, right? Yeah. So all 4 species are the other 3. I think Tachypleus is one of the Tachypleus is on there now, and they're looking at the other Tachypleus and the other Carcinoscorpius. So all 4 hopefully will get the added acknowledgement and protection. And it's not a regulatory protection. It is just saying these animals are in dire straits.
And they're so special
for those special things, and that you have to kind of make it personal. And everybody said to me, you're looking at this, and you're a typical ecologist. You want to protect everything.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all right. I don't mind being typical, but the idea is that there is a practical importance to these animals. And for the most horrendous reason, it became more and more important only in this last 2 years, 2019 through 2020, because of their blood. And
we're going to get to that now.
And that is an amazing acknowledgement of the animal, not because it has an antiviral capability. Its blood is blue. It's hard. It costs that amount of blood from a single horseshoe crab, a few liters. You can see how they're doing. Each of those bottles run about $60,000 in LAL cost. And it's a $425 million industry, pharmaceutical industry, in 3 basic pharmaceutical companies in the United States, and in one in Japan and China. But they're basically housed out of the United States. And it does something that has been shown to be unique for our overall human health, because it's a bacterial endotoxin detecting system. And that endotoxin detecting system is basically for bacteria. now what would that have to do with the viruses that we're talking about? Well, every year in the United States, 275,000 people die from sepsis. They go into a hospital. 1 out of every 3 people going into hospitals, it's kind of the black humor, funny, you go into the hospital to get sick. I mean, the whole idea of contamination by bacterial contamination, gram-negative bacteria contamination in your respiratory or circulatory system is a death sentence, is sepsis. It's not a pretty picture. And so that's what LAL, limulus amoebocyte lysate, the extract from the blood, the amoebocytes help in detect, because it's instantaneous, it's 100% or 99.9% efficient and effective. And when you're dealing with somewhere in the neighborhood of, at some point in time, what, 5 billion, 10 billion inoculations, how do you test for all of them to make sure that they're not contaminated? LAL was used by NASA for years in the space shuttle program. Every time a space shuttle would go up, they would take a satellite up, and the satellites were coated in gold, a thin veneer of gold. And they had to make sure that there was no contamination, any kind of contamination, so that they would not give faulty readings, even if they were in a vacuum of space. And what did they use to detect that? LAL. So it's been used repeatedly, every hospital, every surgery, every injectable drug, insulin for diabetics. I'm a type 2 diabetic. I want to make sure, I don't take insulin, but I want to make sure that the pharmaceutical chemicals that I take, right, that they have to be tested at some point. So it's called batch testing, quality control, quality assurance. And all of these inoculations, all of those vials of LAL are going to be tested. All of those vials for the coronavirus inoculation have to be tested, maybe 10,000 at a time. And that makes them marketable. Then they can sell them, or they can then distribute them. But they couldn't just do that. So this is kind of, I call it kind of the adjunct assistance that has to do with the pandemic. And it's with any kind of disease that's associated with xenobiotics. I mean, this is the tough thing that societies have to look at. Not blame it on anybody, but take a look at human physiology and health. And horseshoe crabs play an important role. Whether or not the pandemic happened or didn't happen, they were still doing what they were doing. Every nurse at Malloy College knows about LAL, permanent because I tell them about it. But seriously, they know all about it because they've actually done internships out at the laboratory.
What if we run out of horseshoe crabs?
What's that?
What if we run out of horseshoe? What if there are no more horseshoe crabs? What if they're gone?
The pharmaceutical companies, there are a few that have been kind of rivaling getting a synthetic. And the FDA has a very strict, and I believe it needs to be strict. I mean, we're dealing with human health here, so that you want to make sure that there's no possibility of that. And we even see, look what happened with even in the pandemic, several different types of immunizations. And I got my shots that were Pfizer. I don't have any stock in Pfizer. It doesn't really matter, but they went through the protocols. They went through and they showed that this is the safest, this is the most effective, and therefore others can do it as well. It is competitive. I mean, if we don't believe things that are competitive, I'm not sure how to answer that, but I can say we lose horseshoe crabs. We don't have the effectiveness that we have now. Maybe we can do that, but
isn't there a synthetic material that has not yet been approved for use in this country, but it does exist?
Used in Europe.
Yes,
in Europe
absolutely.
Since
And
2003.
that has been the kind of little debate just recently. I'm all for synthetics. That would definitely help if we can do that.
It really seems the way forward. I mean, we talk a lot about, new medicines and discoveries from the ocean,
Right.
from the plants and animals that live there, the microbial systems. But it really seems that the key driver needs to be, once you identify something, you don't just kind of keep taking that animal just to, exploit it. but
Right.
you put all effort into finding and creating the synthetic equivalent.
You use it, nature as the library,
The
not as the
guideline,
mine.
yeah, not as a
Yeah.
mine.
And I
And
think
because
that
this,
that will be happening very soon. I'm hoping sooner than later. But everything that I've spoken to at FDA and people that have worked for the pharmaceutical companies and have retired and left and can say things now that they couldn't say before, which is interesting. All have said, it's right at the cusp. It needs to happen, and
has to. I
and
mean,
it should happen soon.
And
they
these,
should be the primary protectors of horseshoe crabs.
Yeah.
right. I mean, they're so reliant upon it. I mean, all of us right now are pretty reliant upon it, whether you're getting a tetanus shot or a COVID shot
Or whatever.
you say insulin, whatever it is.
But
Right.
most people have no idea that the sacrifice of these animals for our benefit. It's not about eating them, it's about using their special blood.
Yeah. And I've heard, yeah, I've been reading quite a lot about, the research on these, and it says that they take about 30% of the blood from a crab before they either chop it up for bait or, and sometimes they try to return them to the ocean.
Right.
But
I mean, who
that
knows?
was a big myth.
But who knows if they, what the recovery rate is, or if they even recover.
That's the worst case scenario, and I agree that
These are
there have been
sacrificial
literature
animals.
says 35%. There's literature that says 1 or 2%. Depends on who you're talking to and what the protocol was for the research. But there is something there that gets us back to what I believe to be, and please understand that I'm not against fishermen necessarily. I understand that historically and culturally, and commercially. But the idea is that these animals are the only animals that can be used for bait. And the only reason that is being said is because they get it for free. In New York, there are 650,000 animals harvested for bait on the East Coast in the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, 650,000. New York State issues a permit. You get a permit from New York State. I get a permit from New York State that goes into getting the crabs that I can harvest 60 a day. And I only take just like 1 day to get them into the lab and maintain them. And then that's a whole other story about the aquaculture of these animals. But getting to the idea of what they get done with, if they're bled, if they're in a pharmaceutical, they bleed them, they keep them for 24 hours, and then they're supposed to return them to the main environment that they were collected in. And if you remember way back when we did our first issue at Dowling, we were saying, oh no, they take them and they bring them up to Massachusetts. Then they don't release them there. They say they're going to release them back, but they don't release them. They sell them to fishermen and they chop them up as bait. So they get double duty out of that. And then if you're a fisherman and you collect 60 a day and you chop them up and throw them in a refrigerator, you don't have to spend a penny because you've gotten them all free from a permit. And again, that's the argument that's being made, that they're following the permit. The population in New York, 3 years in a row, identified as poor by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And the only place that is stable, totally stable, is within preserve, because it's a biosphere preserve. No take in that preserve. Now, on the periphery and the outside of the boundary, I tell this story all the time. We do a lot of academic international travel when I was at Dowling College and here at Malloy College. And we would go to Belize. It's just there's Glover's Reef there, which is a coral reef atoll, and it's like 3.5 hours off the shore of Belize. It's just beautiful, Glover's Reef. And so we would stay there. They were doing the queen conch, the pink shell, the beautiful shell, the queen conch. So they have a preserved boundary. And so we're getting a lecture from the local fishermen to the students one afternoon. And all of a sudden he gets a phone call, a cell phone call, and he says, I gotta go. Takes off. I said, oh, okay, I can't finish your lecture. All right, no problem. So he takes off. And about 4 hours later, he comes back and we were sitting around, the students were sitting around just, having something to eat that evening. And he goes, I'm so sorry I had to go, but we had to do a law enforcement action. And he explains what happens. Fishermen go to the boundary of the preserve, jump in the water and snorkel into the preserve. And then any conch that are in the preserve that they can get, and we were monitoring them all week by putting out transect lines and going in the water, counting how many there were. And then they just move them, pick them up and put them on the boundary of the preserve. Then they get on their boat and they wait till the next morning, and all of those conch have gone outside of the preserve. They come and they pick them up and they go. So this ranger said, I got to catch them before they get back on their boat, because he spotted them. And so he went and somebody got arrested and all that kind of thing, or was fined. I never knew what the end result was. I mean, because these poaching things can get pretty dangerous, obviously.
Very
right?
dangerous.
Not necessarily for invertebrates, but for just about anything these days. But I said, the criminal mind is genius. I mean, why not apply that to help protect these animals rather than doing that? But economically, it made them come up with this idea of putting them on the boundary, wait till they the conch didn't know where they were going necessarily.
Yeah, they don't know where the boundary is.
Right, they're grazing off somewhere. There was no line, no light.
Yeah.
And so I tell that story all the time, because I go, the effort to protect animals long-term is comprehensive, and in many respects can be incredibly frustrating, because it can seem to be a reasonable approach to things. But Barry Commoner at Queens College for years. He spoke at the first Jamaica Bay Conference, 1980, when I was with the Park Service. And he said to me, he goes, Jack, you can be incredibly environmentally conscious, dedicated, and really care about the environment and still be wrong. I go, okay, I got that. We have to kind of look at all of these nuances and bring these things in, and that's important. And this is a beautiful segue here. This picture here, how much plastic is in the ocean? Oh my goodness. I mean, there's a problem you would never think would have been as intensive as it is, because how we were disposing of our trash and our garbage is not like it is today. It is just out of control, totally out of control. Everything is encased, plasticized, and this is just one. Whoop, I see something. Is that me or you?
No, I was just saying that this shows that even other kinds of fisheries or the trash we're putting in the ocean, it can really impact these animals as well. So it's not that we're just like extracting too many, but it's the stuff that we're actually putting into the ocean that can entangle them. They've got all those little legs. And they get wadded up in here in looks like fishing line, or some monofilament of some sort. And what in their long history could prepare them for something like this?
Nothing.
Not much.
Nothing.
Let alone having their blood drained out.
Yeah.
All right, and and their life cycle is pretty unique. They go through the section F there, the trilobite larvae, the juveniles.
Yeah.
But
look how cute they are.
And they, really, I mean, that's it's the cute factor. I mean, they're
just adorable.
High school students love it. They do. I love it. I'm just watching them all the time, moving about. Again, the carapace, the molt, the cycles of doing that. So there's the idea of maturation and development. We've studied a few. We've been looking at ocean acidification as the global issue. I have to admit, I mean, you report the science as it's reported. We've only done 2 small studies, but we're looking at some more. We haven't seen a significant impact in the growth and development. Now, these are laboratory. We don't really know in situ in the environment. So, but right now it's giving us some more indications. We're re-simulating a shoreline in the lab. We're creating with wave action and maybe like a simulated shoreline. So we're going to take a look at what happens there when there's interaction between the sediment and the ocean waters. rather than just the changes in the pH and the exposure thing. So there's still a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah.
Here's the compound eyes of the
Yeah.
horseshoe crab.
They've got
Um,
nine eyes. Yeah. Is that
Yeah.
nine,
There's
10? You know, somewhere in
there
there.
are
But the
primitive
structure-
eyes. There
Oh.
are primitive eyes, which are called ocelli, and it's
they're
like in
just along here,
scallops.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
These are the
and in the
compound eyes.
right under in the beginning of the prosoma, right in the just below these eyes, you'll see. I don't know if the next picture.
I don't know if we have
has-
another picture of the eyes or not.
Oh.
We had a picture of
No.
one showing the telson and the
Right.
little legs.
Okay. But the telson has ocelli on it, and right here in the front of the animal, on its face, there is two ocelli as well. And they're basically light sensitive, so they can detect the light. And Nobel Prize, won for the studying of the observational capability of these animals, and especially their compound eyes.
The other thing that I liked about this picture is, a lot of people, they see them like this and they think that, that like the horseshoe crab's going to get all stabby, right? It's going to like poke them. But,
Right.
they're completely harmless and very gentle animal. They have, no toxins, no venoms, but they use
You
the
can put your
telson.
hand right in there.
Yeah.
Right.
But the telson is used to help them steer and then to help them flip over when they get stuck like this, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the characteristics that I loved about them, because I'm not very brave. So, I mean, I love the idea of these animals are approachable and easy enough to deal with. Very difficult, though, to aquaculture. And that has been a real concern, because at one point in time, we made a proposal to the state that if we could breed the animals, at least, a single female, we've had spawns of 120,000, 200,000 eggs. Now, let's say even 10% of that survives and gets them through 8 or 9 years, 10 years, and to sexual maturity. But even that we wouldn't have to worry about. The idea is to release them into the wild. And so you can see here the male appendage, the female appendage, and across the prosoma, the across the eyes, and there's the mouth parts and the legs surrounding it, and thus the chelicerae. But in its infinite wisdom, New York State DEC does not allow me to release any animals once they come into the lab. Once they're in the lab, that's it. They have to die. We put them in freezers to hold them for study in the future, but we can't release them. And if we give them to high schools and everything like that, the high schools are not allowed to. I jeopardize my permit if I tell them to release them.
But what about
Adults
fish hatcheries, John?
Huh?
How do fish hatcheries get away with it then?
I've argued every kind of aquaculture, and they said that we by doing that we'd be stocking horseshoe crabs. And I said, no, the animal's life cycle doesn't allow for stocking. You have to captively rear them and then release them. Even it's like it's not a good example, but we had Kemp's Ridley turtles nesting off of Breezy Point in the Rockaways, and it's the first time ever recorded. And there was 120 eggs, and 80 of them hatched. And the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Park Service said, release them. And I called up, and I got probably a little indignant, but I just said, you're not giving them a chance. Down in Florida and in the Gulf, they hold on to these are vertebrates. They hold on to them for 6 months to 8 months, get them a little bit bigger to the point where they have at least a slight chance of surviving. But you put all these hatchlings out into the coastline immediately, none of them are going to survive, more than likely. Well, right. I lost that battle too. So the idea is to keep pushing to that type of thing. We should be helping in these animals. Captive breeding helps as long as they're native species. We're not bringing in Tachypleus from Hong Kong Harbor to Coney Island. We're dealing with Limulus, and it should be part of the long-term plan. Now, this monitoring is done. You can see here the tagging of horseshoe crabs. That's a great thing. They're tracking them. But another part of their survivability, the influences on their survivability, is they have a tremendous site fidelity. Oh, there's the 115 locations. This only has, I think, has over 115.
Yeah.
These are what we monitor every year. 20 years we're doing this.
And you could
Right?
use some
Even in
volunteers.
2020, we
You
were
could use
out
some more
there.
volunteers out there, right?
Yeah, this year, last summer, we only had 5 students and myself. So I really stretched myself. I had to go to 20 beaches myself. So
Yeah.
really
So that's
hard work.
something-
Someone had to do it.
Maybe some of
Someone had to
our viewers can be in touch and come out and help you
Save the horseshoe crabs.
monitor where these guys
Absolutely.
are, be some
Yeah.
more observers for you.
And it's easier to do observations these days because we've put the longitude and latitude, right? These are all GPS. You go to the site, you can take a picture and send it, right, on your cell phone. And it's not, we can do the counting, or you can walk the beach and do the counting. It's really easy. And then, but you know, you have all of this infrastructure, the rock riprap, jetties,
Yeah.
all of those types of things along the coastline. It's always difficult. The coastline is changing all the time. It's not just necessarily sea level rise. It's the idea of more and more human influences. The East Coast of the United States, from Maine to Florida, in the last 75 years, has tripled in its population.
Wow.
Tripled.
It's insane.
So all of that is with
It's not
infrastructure.
with the
too.
horseshoe crabs, that's with people, right?
People. Yeah.
People, yes. Yes, people.
So we've got some of your contact information here on this slide, and
Thank
Gigi is posted in the chat, some others, but we're at the top of the hour and we have like questions from people.
Oh,
So
good. Okay.
I am going to attempt to get out of our slideshow here. Hey, there we are. And go right to some questions. Okay, Stephanie says, I was always told that when a horseshoe crab was on the beach and appears dead, it's actually just a shell and the animal has left. Is every horseshoe crab on the beach just a shell?
Does it move?
No, but again, they molt quite a bit. So to grow, depending on the numbers. And so you'd have to go up to the shell. If you see in the carapace, the portion of the carapace in the front of the horseshoe crab, if it's opened, that's where the animal crawls out, and that's a molt. If it still has flesh and doesn't have that break in the prosoma, then it's dead.
That's good. That's good to know.
A good rule.
So Stacy has a really interesting observation. She says, last August on a swim with my friend in Seattle, Washington, we saw a horseshoe crab in about 15 feet of water close to the shore off the Ike Lighthouse. We have some skeptics in our swim club that believe we must have mislabeled the sea creature. But my friend Susan is from the East Coast and she's seen horseshoe crabs at the beach and is absolutely certain of the identification. Our question is, how could a horseshoe crab possibly get to the West Coast? Was it maybe dumped from a home aquarium?
It's maybe that's a good possibility. I've heard of horseshoe. Now I haven't been able to, and I can't say I spent a lot of time investigating this, but due to the currents along the East Coast, some of these animals might get caught up in the Gulf Stream and get brought over to portions of Western Europe, England, and Ireland. And someone told me, I asked to give me, corroboration of that, but I haven't seen it. But for all intents and purposes, even if there were, by some coincidence, the animals found on the West Coast, it's just not the habitat that these animals are normally in.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I can say at this point.
Yeah.
But
So
I can't.
But
Right.
it was
Could have been
aberration.
an aberration. Yeah, you never
She
know.
should have
No,
taken the
it-
photograph.
well,
Yeah, we need the photograph next time.
Okay. Okay.
Let's see. Ida says, with the increase of discussion on climate change impacts of the last few years and the increase of discussions of natural-based solutions and green economy, circular economy, do you have any hope that we as humans will start getting better in conservation incentives? May this give some hope for conservation of horseshoe crabs? I think there's always reason for hope. We were talking just before we went live about, the potential for making some of these areas where horseshoe crabs are one of the Mission Blue Hope spots, and how we can really get the public engaged around, first an animal, then the habitat, the red knots, and just bringing seemingly incohesive groups of people together. So you have, swimmers, birders, people who just love horseshoe crabs, people that just love the beach without so much infrastructure. But bringing them together to try to improve these habitats, it does give us cause for hope. At least it gives me cause for hope.
There's always hope, and I appreciate it. And certainly the Hope Spot concept that Sylvia has put together is inspirational, looking at these types of environments. But as you get closer and closer to urbanizing and to urban sprawl impacts along coastlines, and that the idea that coastlines are the first line of defense against major habitat alterations. We're not talking about generational changes. We're talking about immediate changes, storms and hurricanes and other tsunamis. So look at Fukushima in Japan. The whole coastline near that nuclear power plant will be not used for 100 years. That'll be radioactive in that plant there. The idea of, I don't want to get corny about it, but there really is a need for an attitude change about this animal. It's not just this oddity or this alien, creature. It is an organism that exhibits this. We use this term all the time, and it has nothing really to do. In ecology, it's a lot different to use the word sustainability. It has sustained its existence for 445 million years. And it survived things that are such cataclysmic events in Earth history that it's almost the cataclysmic event is our mind, our ability to take a look at this animal and say, look at what it has done, look what it can do, and we should do everything necessary to preserve it. Now, that has some economic outfall, because why not give some kind of credit to fishermen, give them a fishing bait connection so that they purchase only synthetic bait and they don't take horseshoe crabs. Give fishermen who are harvesting finfish or doing trawls or taking up clams, bivalves for harvest, give them an opportunity to not anytime there's a bycatch, to make sure that it's protected and removed if you're doing trawling. There's all of these little checks, right? It's like death by a million paper cuts. We want to reduce the paper cuts, be able to have an opportunity to say that the animal's survival is the priority. And that's why I haven't been successful, but the idea of designating horseshoe crabs as a World Heritage Species by UNESCO, if that was a primary result, if that could happen, then I think at least it gives the attention to the significance. Every country on Earth, by definition, the pandemic is benefiting from the idea of survival of horseshoe crabs, the idea of coming up with the proper immunization and the treatment, and every one of those unfortunate people in hospitals, all of the influences in those things all had to do with protection against not only the virus, but reducing the collateral damage that's associated with bacterial infection, which is still at the rate that I mentioned before, 275,000 deaths a year in the United States alone. We're not even talking about, and there are millions of hospital operations, millions of each year, and all of those operations depend on endotoxin detecting systems, LAL. Now, you can get other endotoxin chemicals in the pharmaceutical cornucopia of pharmaceuticals, but they're not as effective and efficient and instantaneous as LAL is. And that's right now, that has been a target. And I think there are some new companies that have been looking at that, and I pray that they can, I mean, if they can get jump started a little bit more in funding and then get that into the FDA. And I think they have applied to the FDA and they're just waiting for them to kind of do
And
more trials.
maybe it would help if, you know, individual people just start kind of petitioning the FDA to accelerate the development and use of the synthetics, or to adopt the use of the synthetics that have been
Right.
proven safe.
I think that's an endpoint that could help, and yeah, that
Absolutely.
would be a good thing.
There should be a sense of urgency about it, because horseshoe crabs are on the decline. There's
Yes, they are.
no question about that. You can
Yep.
see that the source of this very, I want to say, magical material
Magic material.
is, we could eliminate the source. Let's not do that. Let's use the horseshoe crabs literally as a library. Get the recipe, replicate the active ingredients, and apparently it has been done, or is very close. The close is not there if we don't have it available in this country now,
Correct.
when the need is so great. And it really makes
Every sense.
no sense to continue to rely on squeezing the blood out of wild animals
Oh my God, right?
so that we can have a test that saves human lives.
One of our viewers
I
is
agree.
asking, is the lag time between harvesting the blood, or what is the lag time between harvesting the blood and releasing the live crab if they're released? Is it possible to keep them extra days to give them a better shot at post bleeding survival?
Well, I don't run a pharmaceutical company, and I don't know, you know, that it's
That's
their
priority.
MO, how they operate, what they do. And again, just in New York, 135,000 for bait, 600,000 overall for harvesting. You got to put them back supposedly in the main place, and that there are places which they're not allowed. And I think that's the key. Maybe just no collection for bait, and the animals that are collected must go back into the exact same environment that they were collected, and not.
Oh, but they've been in the
So-
laboratory.
Yeah.
That's against what you experienced.
Yeah,
Once
Yeah,
in the
they-
laboratory, you can't put them back. Right?
yeah.
Right, and the labs that have been pretty good in this circumstance here, they didn't want to. They certainly have, again, an economic interest in looking at this, and so, and they have supported some of the conferences, some of the research. They're not sitting back very cavalier about it, but I think it is important, and I think the pandemic has brought it more and more to the forefront, that until these animals are protected, and extinction is something that, like you say, one day you wake up and they're gone. And
Yeah.
that's how it happens. And it's not, it doesn't, they say, well, the numbers are stable. I says, well, the numbers can be destabilized pretty quickly. And the idea of no restrictions on taking them for bait, how could you argue that taking them for bait doesn't have an impact? They're gone. They're
Yeah.
not breeding anymore. And they concentrate more on the females, even though they've tried to go just take males, but you got to have somebody monitoring that. You got to have somebody over the shoulder, every fisherman, and that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Never happen.
So I'm going to kind of, because we're running short on time, and I know you have to go to a class very soon.
Yeah.
I'll combine a couple of these questions. April and Jenny are asking, how much do we really know about the life cycle at the time when the horseshoe crab is not showing up on the beach? And what is the time period for tagging horseshoe crabs? Does it go for weeks or months or years?
You mean tagging? When did they get recaught?
Yeah.
Identified? Well, again, they have a tremendous site fidelity. So depending on where they're tagged, more than likely they'll be in that same region. In other words, New York crabs are not going to Florida, no matter how the temperature is. It's not happening. So the idea of the tagging and the numbers and who's monitoring them, it's like all things that are monitored. I mean, CERCOM's primary purpose as a field station is monitoring, and that's intensive. But usually monitoring is the first thing that gets cut in budgets. And we have felt it, and we were mostly volunteers, but there's only 3 of us at the lab right now, and we concentrate on students. So we have summer is active with at least 15 students, other than last summer for COVID restrictions. They had to be only 1 student per lab per day, that type of thing. And so we worked it out. Everybody did it. Everybody be tested, and we had all the kind of things that were going on. And people got their shots because they're associated with the, education. And so, we're going to bring up this next year, but it didn't take away the idea of harvesting the numbers of permitted in New York State, and we still can't release any of them. And they're still exotic foods. And you go to YouTube, look up horseshoe crabs. They don't tell you about their biology. They tell you about how you can use their carapace for a bowl, so
it's just awful.
That's where it is. But
Well,
I could take away 3 little things that if
Yes, please.
I can
What
be
can
so
we
bold
do?
to do this, because thank you. You have been amazing today. I just really appreciate this. And but the World Heritage designation, somehow, I'm not the best at getting that kind of massive movement going, but it really does need to be an opportunity. The idea of writing to the FDA and talking about the LAL and the idea of why, because the debate is taking the circumstances, and then it is a voluntary type of thing. There was years ago, we had quite a few volunteers, and it's a dedication. It's important, but any organization, any group, I'm not the only horseshoe crab individual around, certainly not even in New York. So there's tons of groups that are looking and monitoring, but it's data driven. And if they don't accept the data just because it's coming out of a college and it's not coming out of the federal government or out of a state government or out of a NGO, that is a hurdle that's very difficult to overcome. We've got 20 years worth of data, and all we have shown is the population is slowly declining on Long Island, which has been identified and admitted to by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and that the habitat is being lost at a greater rate, up to 8%.
Yeah.
And population is about 1%. So again, you got to look at all data, talk about it. And it's not only ignored, but it's kind of it's not taken seriously. And I find very difficult.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much for all your time today, champion of the horseshoe crab. And I hope all our viewers, will, reach out to you, and those that live locally nearby or up and down the coast can reach out and figure out like where they can go to help the horseshoe crab and become, citizens, help with some citizen science projects, support the, a new Hope Spot in the area, or a Hope Spot wherever you have horseshoe crabs. Let's get that going and have a network of a horseshoe crab hope.
Yeah, I keep thinking, if we found a living dinosaur, people would be all over it and be in, sense of wonder. Oh, look at this amazing animal. Right. These creatures were around, more than 100 million years before dinosaurs, and they're still around.
Yep.
Show them some respect. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Shows that's really the definition of resilience, right? That's really what it should be. Well, that should be the time. Should be using what's going on there.
Awe and respect. So,
well,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I'd like to thank the Ocean Elders, our sponsors, and of course to our community who keeps coming back and diving in with us. Water truly connects us all. Yes. You make us believe in Dive In as a conversational platform, and we are so grateful to everyone. We're going to be back on April 15th. We're going to take a little hiatus, but we'll be back on April 15th. And we'll be talking with my diving instructor, John Englander, about climate and sea level rise.
There you go. There you go.
And before we go, remind everyone, take care of the ocean.
Yes. As if your life depends on it.
Because it does.
Thanks so much. Really, thank you, Sylvia, Liz.
Thank you, everyone.
An honor to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care now.